They say a man's character isn't what he shows in the light. It's what he does in the dark, when the world is frozen over and hope is just a memory. For Jackson Everett, the world had been frozen for 5 long years. Montana Territory, late winter, 1886. The wind was a razor slicing through Pine Ridge Valley, and the snow had been falling for 6 straight days. It buried the world in a beautiful, deadly lie. Beneath it, the mud was frozen so hard it cracked under your boots like a broken promise. Jackson Everett swung a stiff leg over his gelding, his breath coming in short, pained clouds. He was 38, but the war had carved another 20 years into his face. His coat, once the proud blue of the Union, was now a faded, weary gray, the color of the sky itself. He hadn't come to the trading post for warmth. He hadn't come for company. He'd come for a horse. Any horse. One strong enough to pull what was left of his life out of the ditch. The winter of '86 had been a butcher. It took his cattle, freezing them where they stood. It took his crops. It took his supplies. His small ranch, the place that was supposed to be a new beginning after the war, was hanging on by a single, fraying thread. On the path, something caught his eye. A flicker of movement in the endless white. Jackson paused, squinting. It was a rabbit, its coat as white as the snow, except for the dark stain of blood on its hind legs. A broken thing, dying slow. Most men would have walked on by. Some might have put a boot to it, a quick, messy end. But Jackson wasn't most men. He knelt, pulling off his gloves, the cold biting into his knuckles instantly. His hands, the same hands that had stitched up boys screaming under cannon fire, were surprisingly gentle. "You're a long way from home, little one," he murmured, his voice rough from not being used. The rabbit's heart hammered against his fingertips. Fear and pain. He knew the feeling. He took a strip of cloth from his pocket, bound the broken leg with practiced hands, and set the creature in a hollow under a pine tree. "That's all I can do," he said to the wind. "The rest is up to you." It had been months since he'd spoken to anyone but his horse. The words felt strange in his mouth. Ever since Sarah's death 5 years ago, silence had been his only friend. The trading post was just ahead, smoke curling from its chimney. As he got closer, he heard shouting. The door flew open and a man staggered out, tall and broad, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. "You'll regret that, Porter," he bellowed. "The Sons of Dixie don't forget." The man turned and nearly crashed into Jackson. Their eyes met for a second. Jackson's were guarded, weary. The stranger's burned with pure hate. He spat in the snow near Jackson's boots, his eyes lingering on the faded blue coat. "Another damn Yankee," he muttered, his breath a foul wave of cheap whiskey. "This territory's going to hell." Jackson said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago some fights just weren't worth the breath. The stranger climbed onto a fine black stallion, too fine for a man like that, and rode off, leaving nothing but churned snow and a bad feeling in the air. Inside, the warmth of the post hit Jackson like a fist. It smelled of tobacco, pine tar, wet wool, and spilled whiskey. Edwin Porter, the owner, stood behind the counter, his face a mask of disgust. Porter was 60 with one trouser leg pinned neatly at the knee, a souvenir from Gettysburg. "Everett," Porter grunted. "Been a while." "Missed the excitement, Porter. Silas Clay, blessing us with his company," Porter sneered. "Claims he's running things around here now, with his Sons of Dixie. More fools fighting a war that's been over for 20 years. Jackson laid a small sack of cornmeal on the counter. His last. "Need a horse, Edwin. Something that can pull." Porter's eyebrows shot up. "Lost your team?" "All but one. She's too old to work alone." Porter nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. This winter had taken something from everyone. "Don't have much," he said, leading Jackson out the back door into a small yard. "Got a swayback sorrel and 2 half-broke geldings. Not much, but they're alive." Jackson looked them over. They were thin, ribs showing, but their eyes were clear. He was trying to figure what he could trade when he saw her. She wasn't in a pen. She was chained to a fence post. A rusted iron chain was looped around her ankle, rubbing the skin raw. She was a girl, really. Her clothes were little more than rags, her legs bare and blue with cold. Her hair hung in tangled, dirty ropes. She was huddled in what used to be a pigsty, trying to stay warm. And when she looked up, Jackson felt something inside him crack open. Her eyes were the color of a stormy sky, and they weren't filled with fear. They were filled with the memory of fear. Something worse. Resignation. "What the hell is this, Porter?" Jackson's voice was low. Dangerous. Porter shifted on his good leg. "Clay's business, not mine. Traded her for 2 bottles of whiskey and some opium. Said he'd be back in 3 days." He paused. "That was 6 days ago." The girl's lips trembled with cold. And then she spoke, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Please," she whispered. "Take me instead of a horse. I can work. I can cook. I won't run." Jackson didn't move. He just stared. At the chain. At her eyes. At the plea that said she'd begged before. And no one had listened. "She ain't for sale," Porter grunted. "Clay would have my other leg." Jackson turned back to him, his face hard as frozen earth. "What's his name? The man who just left?" "Silas Clay. You do well to steer clear of him." Sheriff Walsh drinks from his bottle. Jackson knelt in front of the girl, looking at the chain. It wasn't even locked, just wrapped tight. A child could have gotten free. "You could have run," he said quietly. She nodded, a tiny movement. "I know. Why didn't you?" Her throat worked. "Nowhere to go." 3 words. 3 words that held a lifetime of pain. Jackson knew that feeling. He saw it in his own reflection every morning. The emptiness when every road leads to a dead end. He stood up, turning to Porter. "How much?" he asked. "For the sorrel, and for her." Porter's face twisted. "What in God's name would you want with her? She's half dead already, and Clay will come looking." "How much?" Jackson repeated, his voice like stone. Porter narrowed his eyes, calculating. 20 for the horse, and, He looked at the rifle slung across Jackson's back. "You're Springfield. Clay won't come after you if he thinks I traded her for a rifle like that." Jackson's hand went to the rifle. It had been with him through Shiloh, through Antietam. It had saved his life more times than he could count. But a rifle couldn't pull a plow. A rifle couldn't save a failing ranch. He laid it on the fence without a word. Porter grunted, took out a knife, and sawed through the sorrel's lead rope. Then he knelt and unwound the chain from the girl's ankle. "She's he said. "God help you both." The girl didn't move. Disbelief held her frozen. Jackson held out his gloved hand. She stared at it. Not with hope, not yet, but with the shadow of it. "My name is Abigail," she whispered. "Abigail Winters." He nodded once. "Jackson Everett." She took his hand. It wasn't the hand of a savior. It was the hand of a man who had dug graves in frozen ground. But it was steady. And for the first time in a long, long time, Abigail Winters stepped forward instead of shrinking back. The journey back to the ranch was a silent one. Porter had given them a worn blanket, and Jackson wrapped it around Abigail's shoulders. She clutched it with fingers that were blue and red, her face a mask of suspicion and gratitude. He helped her onto the sorrel, then mounted his own gelding. They moved slow, their breath hanging in the air like ghosts. He didn't look back. He knew if he'd left her there, chained in that stall, he'd never be able to look at himself in the mirror again. Abigail sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had learned how to make herself small, how to disappear into the background. The snow settled in her hair, but she didn't flinch. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with questions that neither of them was ready to ask. The trail narrowed and they had to ride single file, Jackson in the lead. As they crossed a frozen stream, he saw her fumbling with something inside her tattered coat. A small object, quickly hidden when she saw him looking. He said nothing, but he didn't forget. Miles passed. The wind died, leaving a strange, heavy stillness. They stopped to rest in the shelter of some rocks. Jackson built a small fire, his movements efficient, practiced. "We'll reach my place before nightfall," he said, offering her a piece of dried jerky. "It's not much, but it's warm." She took it with a nod, eating slowly, as if she was afraid it would be snatched away. Her eyes darted everywhere. To the trees, to the trail behind them, to him. "He won't find you," Jackson said, reading her mind. "Not at my place. It's off the main trail." She swallowed. "You don't know him. I know men like him." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "No, You don't. As they got ready to leave, Abigail stood up stiffly. Something fell from her pocket and landed in the snow. A small wooden box, no bigger than her palm, worn smooth with handling. She lunged for it, but Jackson was faster. He picked it up. It was a simple thing, hand-carved from pine. But what made Jackson's heart stop was the name etched into the lid in careful, childish letters. Noah, his son's name. For 5 years he had searched for any sign, any clue. Noah was 8 when he vanished in a blizzard just like this one. They never found a body, just a single mitten, half buried in a drift. Please, Abigail whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Give it back. Jackson's fingers tightened around the box. Where did you get this? His voice was dangerously quiet. It's mine, she pleaded. It's all I have left. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young, but she wasn't a child. There was no way she could be connected to his lost son. It didn't make any sense. And yet, he held the box out to her. She snatched it, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Thank you, she breathed. There's a story there, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, tucking the box safely back into her pocket. There's always a story. She didn't offer anything more, and he didn't ask. They mounted up and rode on as the sun began to sink, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow. His mind was a storm. Questions, suspicions, and a tiny, dangerous ember of something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. But hope was a killer in this country. He pushed it down, focusing on the trail. Whatever her secrets were, they would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting home. They finally crested a ridge as the sun touched the peaks, and his homestead came into view. A small log cabin, a barn, a corral, all nestled in a valley protected by pines. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady column. Abigail's breath caught. Someone's there. Jackson shook his head. No one. I banked the fire before I left. It'll burn for days. Relief flickered across her face, quickly replaced by caution. The cabin wasn't large, but it was built to last. He helped her dismount, her legs buckling slightly. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then let go as soon as she found her balance. I'll see to the horses, he said. Go inside. Fire's still hot. She hesitated, looking from the cabin door to him and back. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice steady, but her eyes full of fear. Jackson met her gaze. Nothing you don't choose to give. She looked confused, as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. She was used to demands, to threats, not choices. I don't understand, she said. You will, he told her. Go on. She climbed the steps to the porch and pushed the door open. A wave of warmth washed over her. She stepped inside and closed the door. Jackson tended to the horses, his mind churning. The box. The name. The impossible hope. When he finally went inside, Abigail was standing exactly where he'd left her, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes darting around the room, memorizing exits. The cabin was simple. A stone fireplace, a wooden table, shelves lined with books and jars. 2 other doors led off the main room, one to his bedroom and one to a smaller room. A room that had once been Noah's. That door had been closed for 5 years. He put a pot of bean soup on the stove. Hungry? He asked. She just nodded. He filled 2 bowls and set them on the table. Sit. She approached the table like a wild animal ready to bolt. They ate in silence. He kept his movements slow, his eyes on his food. He'd seen abused horses act the same way, desperate for food but expecting a kick. When they were done, he pointed to the closed door. The room through there is yours. There's a bed, blankets, some clothes that might fit. Her brow furrowed. Where will you sleep? My room's through there, he said, nodding to the other door. There's a lock on your side. Use it if you want. The confusion on her face deepened. I don't understand. Jackson sighed. It's simple. You need a safe place. I need help on the ranch come spring. Until then, you eat, you rest, you heal. He looked her straight in the eye, his voice low and intense. And you don't belong to anyone. Not Clay, not me, just yourself. Tears filled her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Why are you doing this? He looked away uncomfortable. Get some sleep. Morning comes early. He went to his own room and closed the door. He sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. What had he done? He'd brought a strange woman into his home, a woman with a secret that was tied to the greatest pain of his life. He was risking the wrath of a man like Silas Clay. For what? A name on a box? Or for the look in her eyes that was so much like his own? Through the wall he heard her moving, the creak of Noah's door opening, a soft gasp. In her new room, Abigail stood in the center, her heart hammering. It was a child's room. There were height marks penciled on the doorframe. She ran her fingers over the quilt on the bed. Handmade, a woman's work. In the chest of drawers she found a boy's clothes. A soft shirt, a pair of trousers. They would do. She changed, listening for any sound from the other room, but there was only silence. She sat on the bed and took out the small wooden box. She traced the name. Noah. Not her Noah. Someone's Noah. She opened it. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded over and over. She didn't open it. She knew what it was. A map. A crude map showing a trail to a hidden valley, with an X marking a spot. Clay had been looking for this map for months. He'd beaten her for it. But he never thought to look inside the worthless little box she always carried. A boy had given it to her, a boy with frightened eyes just before Clay had caught her the first time she tried to escape. "Find my pa," the boy had said, pressing the box into her hand. "Tell him I'm alive." But Clay had found her first, and the boy had vanished. The box was all she had left of a promise she had failed to keep. She put the box away. Tomorrow she would find out if the quiet man with the sad eyes was Noah's father, or if this was just another one of fate's cruel jokes. For now she lay down on the bed, pulling the quilt over her. For the first time in months, she slept, deeply, dreamlessly. The next morning Jackson was surprised to find Abigail already up making coffee. She was dressed in Noah's old clothes. They hung loose on her thin frame. They moved around each other cautiously. He went out to do the chores. When he came back, the smell of frying bacon hit him. She had found his supplies and made breakfast. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Less tense. After they ate, Jackson pulled out a wooden crate. Sarah's things. Clothes he hadn't been able to part with. "These might fit better," he said gruffly. "They were my wife's." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "She's gone. 5 years now." "What happened?" "Fire," he said, a single word that held a world of pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She hesitated. "Your son's room. Is he gone, too?" "Lost in a blizzard," Jackson said, his voice flat. 3 years ago. Never found him. His name was Noah." Abigail's face went pale. Her hand went to her pocket, to the box. Jackson's eyes narrowed. "The box," he said. "The one with my son's name on it. Where did you get it?" Her eyes darted to the door. I found it," she stammered. "In the snow, by a creek." It was a lie. He could see it in her eyes. "Did you know him? Did you see him?" The questions tumbled out, urgent, desperate. She stood up abruptly. "I need some air." Before he could stop her, she grabbed one of Sarah's old coats from the crate and fled out the door. Jackson followed her to the porch. He watched her walk to a small rise behind the cabin. There, under a lone pine tree, was a simple wooden marker. Noah's place, a grave with no body. Abigail stood before it, her head bowed. Jackson watched, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion. What did this woman know about his son? Then he saw her kneel in the snow. She reached into her pocket, took out the small wooden box, and placed it gently at the base of the marker. The gesture stopped Jackson cold. That wasn't the act of someone who just found a box. It was the act of someone laying down a burden, fulfilling a promise. He went back inside, his heart pounding. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. He would watch. He would wait. Spring was months away, and this long, cold winter would reveal her secrets, one way or another. Days melted into weeks. The rhythm of survival took over. January brought a cold so deep the cabin timbers cracked like gunshots in the night. Abigail adapted. Her hands grew calloused. The bruises on her skin faded. She learned to cook with their dwindling supplies, to mend clothes, to bank the fire so it would last through the night. Jackson watched her. This puzzle he couldn't solve. They spoke little during the day, but in the evenings by the fire, conversations started to bloom. It began with books. She would read aloud from a copy of Thoreau's Walden, one of Sarah's favorites. Her voice grew stronger each night. One evening, after reading a passage about living deliberately, she looked up. "I think I understand him now," she said softly. "He wasn't running away from life. He was running toward it." Jackson looked up from the trap he was mending. Sarah used to say the same thing. The mention of his wife hung in the air. "Tell me about her," Abigail asked. It was the first time either of them had directly asked about the past. He hesitated, then the words came. She was stubborn, smart, came west to civilize the frontier, and ended up falling in love with its wildness instead. A sad smile touched his lips. She started the school in town the same year Noah was born. Said everyone deserved beauty in their lives, not just survival. A comfortable silence fell between them. "What about you?" Jackson asked, surprising himself. "Before Clay." Her expression flickered. "My father raised horses in Virginia. He died in the war. Our farm was destroyed. I went to live with an aunt. She arranged for me to train as a teacher." A bitter smile. "That's where I met Thomas, Silas Clay's brother. He promised me a job at a school in Denver." She looked into the fire. "There was no school. He brought me west and sold me to his brother for a horse and a bottle of whiskey." Her voice was flat, dead. "Poetic, I suppose, that you traded a rifle for me." "You're not property," Jackson said, his voice sharp. "Never were." She met his gaze, and for a second, he saw the fierce, unbroken woman beneath the scars. "I know that now." That night, the nightmares came for Jackson, same as they always did. Sarah screaming in the fire. Noah lost in the snow, calling his name. He woke up gasping, his skin cold with sweat. He pulled on his boots and walked to Noah's marker on the hill. He did it most nights, a lonely vigil under the stars. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the wind. An apology for failing, for surviving. Then he heard footsteps in the snow behind him. It was Abigail wrapped in Sarah's coat. "I heard you leave," she said softly. She came and stood beside him, not touching, both of them looking at the marker. "To remember," she said. "To remember," he agreed, "and to apologize." Something about the cold, clear night, about her standing there beside him, loosened the words he'd kept locked away for so long. He told her everything. About the blizzard, about trying to make it home from town, about the wagon wheel breaking. "I told Noah to stay put," he said, his hands clenching. "When I looked up, he was gone. Just gone. His tracks were already filling with snow. We searched for days, but all we ever found was his mitten." They stood in the cold, two broken people under a sky full of indifferent stars. "I'm sorry," Abigail said. He just nodded. They walked back to the cabin together, their footsteps making two parallel tracks in the fresh snow. As she reached her door, he said, "Thank you." She paused. "For what?" "For listening." A sad smile touched her lips. "Good night, Jackson." For the first time in 3 years, he had told his son's story out loud, and the world hadn't ended. The grief was still there, a heavy coat he would always wear. But tonight, for the first time, it felt a little less like drowning. In February, a brief thaw came, and Jackson knew they had to go to town for supplies. Flour, salt, coffee. They were running low on everything. Abigail tensed when he mentioned it. She hadn't left the ranch since she'd arrived. "I can stay here," she offered. "Your choice," he said, "but you're welcome to come. People will talk." "People always talk," he replied. "Doesn't mean we have to listen." The sleigh ride to Pine Ridge was cold and bright. The town was just a single dusty street, but after weeks of isolation, it felt like a city. Jackson felt Abigail shrink beside him as they pulled up to the general store. The bell over the door jangled, and all eyes turned to them. Eleanor Mitchell, the owner, was a stern-faced woman whose husband hadn't come home from the war. Her sharp eyes took in Abigail, who stood slightly behind Jackson. "And who might this be?" she asked. "Abigail Winters," Jackson said. "She's staying at my place for the winter." Just then, the bell jangled again. Sheriff Walsh came in, his badge gleaming on his coat, his face red from the cold or the whiskey. The mood in the store shifted. Jackson subtly moved so he was between Walsh and Abigail. "Everett," Walsh grunted. His eyes slid to Abigail. "And who's this?" Before Jackson could answer, Eleanor stepped in, her voice smooth as butter. "Abigail Winters, cousin of Jackson's late wife, visiting from Boston. Terrible timing, poor girl, arriving just before the big snow." The lie was so perfect, so fast it stunned Jackson. Walsh seemed to buy it. He tipped his hat and left. As soon as the door closed, Eleanor's voice dropped. "You should know, Jackson. Silas Clay's been asking about a girl. Not by name, just a girl he claims was stolen from the trading post." She glanced at Abigail, whose face had gone white. "He's offering a reward." Walsh is looking the other way. The cold Jackson felt had nothing to do with the weather. "Appreciate the warning," he said quietly. They finished their shopping quickly. As they were leaving, Eleanor pressed a small, paper-wrapped package into Jackson's hand. "For the girl," she whispered. "Sarah would have wanted it." They were halfway home when the snow started again, driven by a wind that cut like a knife. "He knows I'm here," Abigail said, her voice lost in the wind. "He suspects," Jackson corrected. "Doesn't know for sure." "It's enough. He'll come looking." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Let him look. He'll find more than he bargained for." Back at the cabin, the storm raging outside, Jackson gave her the package from Mrs. Mitchell. Abigail unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a silver hairpin, simple but elegant, the head shaped like a small flower. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Impulsively, she gathered her hair and secured it with the pin. The simple act transformed her. "How does it look?" she asked. Jackson cleared his throat. "Suits you," he managed. A real smile spread across her face, warming the whole room. That night, sitting by the fire, Jackson found his eyes drawn to her, to the silver pin catching the light. Something was changing between them, something quiet and fragile, growing like the first green shoots of spring under the snow. But outside, the storm howled, and they both knew another storm was coming. The blizzard lasted for 3 days. On the fourth morning, Jackson woke to a world buried in white. As he came into the main room, he found Abigail at the window, her face troubled. "Someone's coming," she said. "From the East Ridge." Jackson looked. A single rider was making his way slowly down the slope. "Stay inside," Monty, he said, grabbing his shotgun from the rack by the door. It could be anyone, a lost traveler, another rancher. But they both knew better. He stood on the porch, the shotgun held loosely as the rider got closer. It wasn't Clay. It was Edwin Porter from the trading post. "Porter," Jackson said, surprised. "Long ride in this weather." "Wouldn't have come if it wasn't important," Porter said, his eyes flicking to the cabin window where Abigail was watching. "We need to talk. Privately." In the shelter of the barn, Porter got straight to it. "Clay's been back. Tore my place apart looking for the girl. He's asking questions, offering money. He knows she's here, Everett." Porter's face was grim. "He's gathering men, his sons of Dixie. They're planning to ride out as soon as the trails are clear, and they ain't coming to talk." A cold dread settled in Jackson's gut. "How many?" "7, last I heard. Maybe more." "Why are you telling me this, Porter? You washed your hands of it." Porter looked away, shame on his face. "I've done things I ain't proud of, but there's lines I won't cross. What Clay wants to do to that girl, that's a line." He hesitated. "There's more. He's been talking, bragging, about fires he set." Jackson went completely still. "What kind of fires?" Porter met his eyes. "The kind that take whole houses. The kind that might have taken your wife 5 years back." He mentioned a school teacher, one who'd been filling children's heads with northern ideas. The world tilted. The barn seemed to shrink around him. The roaring in his ears was the sound of flames, of collapsing timber, of a woman's scream cut short. Clay. It was Clay who had killed Sarah. Porter left, urging Jackson to get the girl somewhere safe, that this wasn't a fight he could win alone. Jackson stood in the snow, his mind a storm of rage and grief. Abigail met him at the door. What did he want? He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Just passing through, he lied. But later, inside the warm cabin, she faced him. Whatever it is, she said, her voice strong, we'll face it together. I know Clay is coming. I've always known. She took a breath. Now tell me the truth. He told her about the 7 men. And then he told her what Porter suspected. That Clay was the one who had set the fire that killed Sarah. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Jackson. This was it. The final wall between them. It never was just about you, Jackson said quietly. Not since I saw that box with Noah's name. Their eyes met. The unspoken question finally had to be answered. It's time I told you the truth, she said, her voice shaking. About Noah. About the box. Jackson's heart stopped. You know something about my son? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I met him, Jackson, last winter, when I tried to escape from Clay the first time. The story poured out of her, how she'd hidden in a cave and found a boy there, thin and half frozen, but alive. A boy who said his name was Noah. He'd been surviving there for months, trying to find his way home. We were going to try to get back together, she sobbed, but Clay found us. What happened? Jackson whispered. Noah. He tried to help me. He threw rocks at Clay to give me time to run. But Clay caught me anyway. The last I saw of Noah, he was running into the trees. She pulled the small wooden box from her pocket. He gave me this just before. He said if anything happened, I should find his father. He said this would help. With trembling fingers, she opened the box and took out the folded piece of paper. It's a map, she said, handing it to him. A map to the cave. Jackson unfolded it. It was crude, childish, but he recognized the ridges, the creek, and a small X. His vision blurred. He's alive, he whispered. My boy's alive. He was, she said, strong, resourceful. If anyone could survive, it would be him. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, she cried. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. And later, I was afraid you'd go looking, and that Clay would follow you right to him. Jackson was already on his feet, grabbing his coat. I have to find him. Now. Jackson, wait! She grabbed his arm. Think. It's miles through deep snow, and Clay is coming. If you leave now, you'll never make it back in time. He's survived this long, a few more days. But we have to be smart. Reason, cold and hard, finally cut through the fire in his veins. She was right. He sank back down at the table. The map spread between them. Hope was a terrifying, beautiful thing. His son was alive, and a killer was riding to his door to finish the job he'd started 5 years ago. For 3 days they worked. They turned the cabin and the barn into a fortress. Jackson cut firing ports through the walls. Abigail melted lead and cast bullets at the kitchen table. They moved like soldiers preparing for a battle they knew they couldn't win, but had to fight anyway. On the morning of the 4th day, they heard it. Hoofbeats. 8 riders coming up the valley. Clay in the lead. And beside him, wearing a sheriff's badge, was Walsh. Jackson stepped out onto the porch, his shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. State your business, Clay, he called out, his voice clear in the cold morning air. You got something that belongs to me, Yankee, Clay sneered. I'm here to collect. No man owns another, Jackson said evenly. Not since the war. Last chance, Everett, Clay called. Send her out. Nobody gets hurt. We both know that's not true. Clay's false smile vanished. He turned to his men. Burn him out. Take the girl alive. Everett doesn't leave this valley breathing. The men started to spread out. Jackson brought the shotgun to his shoulder, aiming right at Clay's chest. First man that moves gets a belly full of buckshot. Starting with you. A tense standoff. Then Walsh rode forward. Hold on. No need for bloodshed. What law is that, Sheriff? Jackson shot back, his aim never wavering from Clay. The law that looks the other way, when men like him burn innocent women in their homes? A murmur ran through the posse. What are you talking about? Walsh demanded. Ask him, Jackson said, nodding at Clay. Ask him about the school teacher he burned out 5 years ago. Clay's face turned purple with rage. He's lying. Am I? Jackson's voice rang out. I got no quarrel with any of you, only with Clay and any man who stands with him, knowing what he is. Doubt spread like a virus. Two of the men backed their horses away, then a third. Clay, furious, drew his pistol, but Walsh drew faster, firing a warning shot into the snow at Clay's feet. "That's enough, Silas," the sheriff said, his voice like iron. More men deserted, leaving only Clay and two of his most loyal thugs. Walsh holstered his pistol. "I still need to see the girl," he said. "Verify she's here of her own free will." Jackson called her name. Abigail came out onto the porch, a rifle in her hands. She stood beside Jackson, her chin high. "Miss Winters," Walsh said, "is it true you're here against your will?" "No," Abigail said, her voice clear and strong. "I am no man's property. I stay here by choice." "She's lying," Clay spat. "Tell them how you stole from me before you ran." "The only thing I took," Abigail said, pulling the small wooden box from her pocket, "was this. And it wasn't yours. It belongs to a boy, Noah Everett, Jackson's son." Clay flinched, and just then, a sound cut through the air, a sharp, piercing whistle from the ridge to the east. Everyone looked. Silhouetted against the sun stood a small figure, wrapped in furs, holding a bow. Noah. Jackson breathed his son's name. Clay's reaction was instant. He spurred his horse savagely toward the ridge. "Get the boy!" he screamed at his men. "Don't let him get away again." The fight for the cabin was over. A new, more desperate one had just begun. Jackson didn't hesitate. "Go," Walsh said, his gun now pointed at Clay's two remaining men. "I'll handle this." "Go," Abigail urged, raising her rifle. "I'll meet you at the cave. We know the way." Jackson sprinted for the barn, saddled his gelding, and galloped toward the ridge. His mind was on fire. Noah was alive. Clay knew about him. He had to get there first. He pushed his horse up the steep slope, following the memory of the map. He crested the ridge and saw a flash of movement ahead, a small figure darting through the trees. He dismounted and followed on foot, his heart hammering against his ribs. The tracks led down into a hidden ravine, and there, tucked into the cliff face, was the dark mouth of a cave. "Noah," he called softly. "It's Dad. It's safe." Silence. He stepped into the cave. It was filled with signs of survival, a sleeping pallet of furs, a fire pit, neatly stacked tools. Then a sound behind him. He spun, his hand on his pistol. A boy stood in the entrance, a bow raised, an arrow aimed straight at Jackson's heart. He was taller, leaner, his face serious and weather-beaten. But the eyes, they were Sarah's eyes. "Noah," Jackson whispered, raising his hands. "It's me." The bow didn't waver. "Prove it," the boy said, his voice steady. Jackson's throat went dry. "Your mother's name was Sarah. You had a dog named Buck. You broke your arm falling from the hayloft. You were afraid of thunderstorms." With every word, the bow lowered an inch. "The night you disappeared, you were worried about the horses." His voice broke. "It was the last thing you said to me." The bow clattered to the floor. "Dad." Noah's voice was small now, a child's voice. Jackson opened his arms and his son ran into them, hitting him with a force that almost knocked him over. He held him tight, the years of grief and guilt and loneliness washing away in a flood of tears. "I thought you were dead," Jackson choked out. "I tried to find home," Noah said, his voice muffled against Jackson's coat. "But he found me." "Clay?" Noah nodded, pulling back. "He said he'd take me home, but he lied. He took me to a camp. They talked about burning houses. They said Mom died because she taught Indian children to read." The cold fury that filled Jackson was nothing like he'd ever felt. Just then, a shout echoed from above. It was Abigail. "Jackson, Clay's coming. He's almost here." Jackson grabbed Noah's shoulder. "Is there another way out?" Noah pointed to a crack in the back of the cave. "It's tight, but it goes up." "You go," Jackson said, pulling his pistol. "Both of you. I'll hold him off." "No!" Abigail appeared in the entrance, rifle in hand. "We stay together." Noah grabbed his bow, another arrow already knocked. "I can fight, Dad. I'm not leaving you again." Outmaneuvered, Jackson could only nod. They took up positions at the mouth of the cave. Minutes later, Clay appeared at the edge of the ravine, pistol in hand. "Everett!" Send the boy out. This is between us. It was always about him, Jackson yelled back. I was a prisoner, Noah shouted, his voice cracking with rage. You tied me up. For your own good, son, Clay roared back. You're insane, Abigail said, stepping into view, her rifle aimed at his chest. You kidnapped a child. You burned his mother alive. At the sight of her, Clay's face twisted with hate. Should have broken you when I had the chance. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot went wide. In the same instant, Noah loosed his arrow. It flew true, sinking deep into Clay's shoulder. He screamed, dropping his pistol. Jackson was already moving, closing the distance. Clay was on his knees in the snow, clutching the arrow. Should have killed you all, he spat, his eyes wild with pain and hatred. Should have burned your ranch just like I burned your... The confession was cut short by the sharp crack of a rifle. Clay jerked, then fell face first into the snow. On the ravine's edge, Sheriff Walsh lowered his smoking rifle. Heard that, Walsh said grimly, making his way down the slope. Heard every word. He looked at Noah, then at Clay's body, then at Jackson and Abigail. Well, he sighed, seems we've got a lot to sort out. But first, let's get you all home. The storm hit as they rode back to the ranch, a strange, exhausted procession. Jackson with Noah riding in front of him, arms wrapped tight around his waist. Abigail on her sorrel. Walsh leading the horse that carried Clay's body. Inside the warmth of the cabin, the reality began to sink in. Walsh accepted Jackson's offer to wait out the storm. Abigail started making soup, and Noah, watching her move around the familiar space, asked the question that hung in the air. Are you going to be my new mother? The directness of it stunned them all. Walsh coughed and beat a hasty retreat to check on the horses. Jackson knelt down in front of his son. Noah, it's not that simple. Why not? Noah asked with perfect childhood logic. You're alone. She's alone. You both helped me. Seems simple enough. Later, after Noah had finally fallen asleep in his own bed for the first time in 3 years, Jackson and Abigail stood at the window, watching the snow swirl. What happens now? She asked softly. He turned to her, to the woman who had walked through fire and ice and come out stronger. That depends, he said, on what you want, Abigail. She met his gaze, her eyes clear and sure. I want to stay, here, with you and with Noah. Something in his chest, something that had been knotted tight for 5 years, finally let go. I want that too, he said, his voice thick. But I need you to be sure, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because it's what you want. Her hand found his. I am sure, she said. I've had nowhere to belong for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like. Until here, until you. I choose this, Jackson. I choose you. He lifted her hand to his lips. Then stay, he whispered. Help me raise my son. Help me remember how to live, not just survive. Her smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Yes, she said. Yes. Spring came late that year, but when it came with a wild, beautiful rush. The valley turned green, and the ranch came back to life. Jackson and Noah worked side by side, rebuilding fences, planting fields. Abigail started a garden, her laughter becoming a common sound in the valley. The wary, haunted boy who had come out of the wilderness began to heal, and so did the man who had thought he'd lost everything. One warm evening, they stood under the old apple tree, watching a nest of robin's eggs begin to hatch. Noah looked between them, a sly grin on his face. Does this mean you're finally going to get married? Mrs. Mitchell asked me. Said the whole valley's waiting. Jackson shared an amused look with Abigail. He turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. I had a whole speech planned, he said, his voice soft, about how you brought life back to this place, about how I never expected to find love again. But I find I only need to ask one question. He took a deep breath. Abigail Winters, will you marry me? Not because it's sensible, but because I love you. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Yes, she said, her voice full of joy. Yes, Jackson Everett, I will marry you, because I love you too. He kissed her then, under the falling apple blossoms, as the future unfolded before them, hard-won, beautiful, and full of promise. The long winter was finally over. A new season had begun. If you enjoyed this story of survival and second chances, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next trip into the wild frontiers of the human heart.